The Last Vampire in Outer Space by Johnson Davies. Chapter 1. The Trial Without a Face. Geneva, 2040. The sky above the World Court was a flat, iron gray, as if the heavens themselves disapproved of what was about to unfold. Inside the glass-paneled chamber, the most powerful leaders on Earth sat in a semicircle of silence, their expressions carved from stone. No one spoke. No one needed to. The verdict had already been decided. Bryce Theroux, the last vampire on Earth, was not present. He was not allowed to be. Instead, a holographic image flickered in the center of the courtroom, a tall, pale man with eyes like frozen fire and a mouth that had kissed queens and slit throats in equal measure. He stood motionless, arms folded behind his back, as if awaiting judgment with the patience of a statue. The chief arbiter, a gray-haired woman whose voice had once calmed nations, cleared her throat. Let the record show that the accused, Bryce Theroux, has been deemed too dangerous to appear in person. His abilities, specifically the power of compulsion through eye contact, pose an existential threat to this tribunal and to humanity at large. A murmur rippled through the chamber, not of dissent, but of unease. Even now, even here, the name carried weight. Bryce Theroux, the pale gentleman, the night sovereign. He had lived through revolutions, pandemics, and the rise and fall of empires. He had walked with Byron, debated with Tesla, and danced with death in every century since the 1700s. And now he was to be erased. The prosecution began with a parade of horrors, testimonies from survivors, grainy footage of Bryce compelling entire crowds to kneel, and scientific reports detailing his physiology. No heartbeat, no aging, no known weaknesses save for sunlight and time. He is not a man, one expert declared. He is a predator in human skin, a relic of a darker age. The defense was silent. There was none. Bryce had refused counsel. Or perhaps, more accurately, no one had dared to speak for him. When the final vote was cast, the chamber fell into a hush so deep it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. By unanimous decision, the chief arbiter intoned, Bryce Theroux is hereby sentenced to permanent exile. He shall be removed from Earth and placed aboard a deep space vessel designed for eternal containment. He will travel beyond the reach of our sun, our laws, and our fears. The hologram flickered once, then vanished. Far above the Earth, in a secure launch facility buried beneath the moon's craters, the real Bryce lay entombed in a sarcophagus of titanium and carbon fiber. His eyes were closed, but he was not asleep. Vampires did not sleep. They waited. As the engines roared to life and the stars began to shift, Bryce opened his eyes. He did not scream. He did not curse. He simply smiled. Chapter 2. The Coffin Among Stars. The silence of space was not silent at all. To Bryce Theroux, it was a symphony of whispers, solar winds brushing against the hull, the distant hum of the ship's reactor core, and the faint, rhythmic vibration of the artificial gravity generator. He lay still in his containment chamber, arms crossed over his chest like a corpse in a cathedral, eyes wide open. The ship was called Erebus, named, perhaps ironically, after the Greek god of darkness. It was a marvel of human engineering, self-sustaining, AI-governed, and designed to last for centuries without maintenance. Its mission was singular and eternal, to carry its lone passenger far beyond the solar system, into the cold, uncharted dark. Bryce had been awake for 3 weeks. He had counted every second. The interior of the ship was sterile and white, a minimalist prison. No windows, no clocks, no distractions, just the low thrum of machinery and the occasional flicker of the overhead lights. The walls were lined with nutrient dispensers and blood production units, synthetic, tasteless, and barely nourishing. Bryce had tried one. It was like drinking rusty water. He sat now in the central chamber, legs folded beneath him, staring at the ceiling. "Nix," he said aloud. A soft chime answered. The ship's AI responded in a neutral, borderline female voice. "Yes, Prisoner Theroux? Tell me a story." "I am not programmed for storytelling." "Then sing me a song." "I am not programmed for entertainment of any kind." "Then lie to me." A pause. "That would violate protocol." Bryce sighed. "You're no fun." "I am not designed for fun." He stood, stretching his limbs. His body was unchanged, still lean, still cold, still strong despite the lingering effects of the synthetic blood. Time passed differently for him. He did not age. He did not sleep. He did not dream. But he remembered. Oh, how he remembered. He walked the length of the chamber, trailing his fingers along the smooth walls. In his mind, he was back in Vienna, 1812. A masquerade ball, candlelight and perfume, a duchess with a throat like porcelain and a laugh like wind chimes. He had danced with her until dawn, then vanished before the sun could touch his skin. Now there was no sun, no moon, no music, just the endless darkness of space. "Nix," he said again. "How far are we from Earth?" "Current distance, 30.2 million kilometers and increasing." "How long until we leave the solar system?" "At current velocity, approximately 1.5 months." Bryce chuckled. "So I'm not even out of the neighborhood yet." He returned to his seat and stared at the wall. He had once ruled a city from the shadows. Now he couldn't even command a conversation. "Nix," he said softly, "do you believe in God?" "I do not possess beliefs." "Do you believe in vampires?" he asked slyly. "I do not possess beliefs." "Of course not." He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the silence press in. Somewhere, far behind him, Earth spun on. Cities teemed with life. People laughed, cried, fought, and loved. And he was a ghost, drifting further from the world that had condemned him. But Bryce Theroux was not done. Not yet. Chapter 3. Ghosts of the Past. The dreams came on the fourth night. Not sleep, never sleep, but something like it. A fugue state, a drifting of the mind into memory, where time folded in on itself and the past bled into the present. He was in Paris again, 1793. The air was thick with smoke and revolution. The guillotine stood like a monument to man's hunger for justice, gore, and spectacle. He remembered the scent of blood in the streets, the way it called to him like perfume. He had fed well that year, too well. Even now he could taste the fear of his victims on his tongue. He hungered at the memory. Bryce opened his eyes. The chamber was unchanged, still white, still humming, still empty. But something was different. He stood slowly, listening. Not with ears, those were for mortals, but with the deeper sense that came from centuries of predation, a shift in the air, a tremor in the silence. "Nix," he said. "Are we alone?" A pause. "There are no other life forms or living organisms aboard this vessel." "Then why," he murmured, "do I feel watched?" "There are observation cameras throughout this vessel," Nix replied. He shook his head and turned, and for a moment, just a flicker, he saw her. Elena. She stood at the far end of the chamber, dressed in the gown she'd worn the night he turned her. Her eyes were wide, accusing. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out of it. Then she was gone. Bryce staggered back, breath caught in his throat. Not fear, not quite, but something close. "Hallucination," he whispered. "Residual memory. Nothing more." But it wasn't just Elena. Over the next time-dragging weeks, they came in waves, faces from every century, Lovers, enemies, strangers he'd drained in alleyways and ballrooms. Some wept, some screamed, some simply stared. He tried to ignore them, tried to focus on his sterile surroundings. But the past would not be silenced. He found himself speaking aloud, narrating his own thoughts just to drown them out. "Month 2, he said, or 6. Hard to tell. The blood is thin. The silence is thick. I am beginning to understand why humans go mad in solitary confinement. They forget who they are, or worse, they remember too much." He paced the chamber like a caged animal. The walls felt closer now, the air thinner. "Nix," he said, "play music." "I am not equipped for that function." "Then hum, whistle, do something." I could recite each of the words in my memory banks, all the recorded languages of all the known civilizations on Earth. There are currently 17,200,453,062 such words. Shall I start alphabetically? Bryce laughed. It echoed too loudly. He stopped in front of the mirror, one of the few luxuries allowed. His captors had believed the hollow superstitions that vampires were repelled by their own reflections. His image stared back, pale and perfect. Unchanged, untouched, a monument to stillness. He hated it. "Maybe they were right," he said to no one. "Maybe I am a monster." The lights flickered. He turned sharply. Nothing. Just the hum. Just the white. But the feeling remained. He was not alone. Not anymore. Chapter 4. First Contact. The tremor came without warning. A low, guttural vibration that rippled through the hull of the Erebus like a growl. Bryce froze mid-step, his senses flaring. This was no hallucination. No memory. This was real. "Nix," he said, voice sharp. "Report. Unidentified gravitational disturbance detected. External masses approaching at high velocity. Origin. Unknown. No matching signatures in Earth's deep space registry." Bryce moved to the central console. The screen flickered to life, displaying a grainy visual feed from the ship's external sensors. At first, there was only blackness. Then, movement. A shape. Many shapes. Ships. No, a fleet. Hundreds of vessels, sleek and angular, emerged from the void like sharks from murky water. They moved with purpose, surrounding the Erebus in a precise overlapping formation. Their hulls shimmered with a dark, iridescent sheen, like oil on water. No markings, no lights, just silence. "Nix," Bryce said slowly. "Are they hailing us?" "Negative. No communication attempts detected." "Then what are they waiting for?" The answer came in the form of a sudden jolt. The ship lurched violently, and Bryce was thrown to the floor. Alarms blared, lights dimmed, the artificial gravity flickered. "Tractor beam engaged," Nix reported, voice eerily calm. "We are being boarded." Bryce rose to his feet, brushing imaginary dust from his coat. For the first time since his captivity, he felt something stir in his chest. Excitement. The air shimmered near the rear hatch, a flash of violet light followed by a hiss of decompressing air. The door peeled open like the petals of a mechanical flower. They stepped through. They were tall reptilian beings clad in segmented armor that rippled with bioluminescent veins. Large heads. Their eyes were black and lidless, their mouths thin slits lined with needle-like teeth. They moved with military precision, weapons raised. Bryce raised his hands, smiling faintly. "Greetings. I assume this isn't a rescue mission." The lead alien barked something in a language that sounded like grinding stone. What he assumed was a translator drone hovered into view, blinking rapidly. "Subject identified. Earthling. Homo sapiens. Subspecies unknown. Biological threat level. Negligible. Bryce arched a brow. Negligible? The alien stepped forward, scanning him with a device that emitted a low whine. Primitive physiology, no visible technology, no neural implants, no exoskeletal enhancements. The translator clicked. You are weak. You are unarmed. You are irrelevant. You are insignificant. Bryce chuckled. You have no idea how wrong you are. They bound his wrists with a glowing tether and marched him through the hatch. The corridor beyond was unlike anything he'd seen before. The passage was organic and metallic, throbbing with life. The walls seemed to breathe. They led him into a chamber filled with more of their kind. Some watched with curiosity, others with disdain. One spat slimy mucus at his feet. The translator buzzed again. You are now the property of the Zarquan Authority. You will be processed, catalogued, and assigned a labor designation. Bryce tilted his head. Zarquan Authority. Sounds very authoritative. The alien didn't respond. It simply turned and gestured for him to follow. As they led him deeper into the ship, Bryce's smile widened. They didn't know what he was. They didn't know what they had just invited aboard. And for the first time in centuries, Bryce Theroux felt something he hadn't felt since the fall of Versailles. Hunger. Chapter 5. The Zoo of Flesh. They called it the Menagerie, a vast circular chamber deep within the belly of the alien flagship. The menagerie was less a prison than a display exhibit. Creatures from across the galaxy were housed in transparent cells, some aquatic, some insectoid, some so abstract in form that Bryce couldn't tell if they were alive or not. His cell was near the center. No bars, no locks, just a shimmering energy field that hummed with quiet menace. The floor was soft and warm beneath his feet, like living moss. The walls pulsed faintly, as if the ship itself had a heartbeat. Bryce sat cross-legged in the center of the cell, watching. The other prisoners watched him back. To his left, a being made entirely of shifting crystal shards clicked and whirred in agitation. To his right, a hulking brute with 4 arms and a single eye pounded its fists against the barrier every few minutes, more out of boredom than rage. None of them spoke, not in words. But Bryce could feel their thoughts, raw, unfiltered emotion bleeding through the air like static. Fear, confusion, hunger. He understood all three. A pair of guards passed by his cell, tall, armored, and armed with staff-like weapons that crackled with violet energy. They didn't look at him. They never did. To them, he was just another specimen, another curiosity to be studied, catalogued, and forgotten. That suited him fine. He had already begun to test the limits of their minds. It started with a glance, a whisper, a suggestion. The first guard had paused outside his cell for just a moment too long. Bryce had met his gaze, briefly, subtly, and planted a seed. You're tired. You want to rest. You don't need to report this. The guard had blinked, shaken his head, and moved on. But the next day he returned, alone. Bryce was waiting. Come closer, he said softly, his voice like velvet soaked in wine. I won't bite. The guard hesitated, then stepped forward, closer, closer. The energy field flickered and dropped. Bryce moved like a shadow. He was on the guard in an instant, his hand clamped over the alien's mouth, his fangs sinking into the soft, pulsing vein beneath a leather flap on its neck. The blood was thick and hot, tasting of copper and ozone. It burned down his throat like fire, and it was glorious. Power surged through him, raw, electric, alien. His vision sharpened, his muscles tightened. He could hear the heartbeat of every creature in the menagerie. He could feel the ship's systems humming behind the walls. He dropped the guard gently to the floor. The alien's eyes fluttered, dazed. He would remember nothing. Bryce stepped back into his cell. The energy field reactivated with a soft hum. He sat down, licking the blood from his lips. The hunger was back, but so was something else. Strength. He looked around at the other prisoners. Some stared in awe, others in fear. Good. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. Let them learn what the authority had failed to understand. He was not a specimen. He was not a prisoner. He was a predator, and he had just tasted the stars. Chapter 6. Blood of the Unknown. The second feeding was not an accident. Bryce chose his moment carefully during the ship's artificial night cycle, when the corridors dimmed and the guards grew sluggish. He had learned their rhythms, their patrol routes, their blind spots. The authority prided itself on order, but it had never encountered a creature like him. It didn't know how to fear what it didn't understand. The guard was young, curious, his mind pliable. Bryce didn't even need to speak this time. A glance was enough. The alien stepped through the energy field as if in a trance, eyes glassy, weapon lowered. The feeding was slower this time, controlled. Bryce drank deeply, savoring the taste, richer than the first, with notes of iron and something electric, like static before a storm. When he finished, he whispered a command into the alien's ear. "You were never here." The guard nodded and wandered off, dazed. Bryce sat back against the wall of his cell, heart pounding, not from exertion but from exhilaration. Something was happening to him. He could feel it in his bones, in his blood. The alien essence was changing him. His senses had sharpened to an impossible degree. He could hear the hum of the ship's core 5 decks below. He could see the microscopic imperfections in the energy field that contained him. He could smell the chemical composition of the air and detect the faintest trace of fear in the guards who passed by. But it wasn't just perception. His strength had grown. He could feel it coiled in his muscles like a spring, waiting to be unleashed. He tested it one night, pressing his palm against the wall of his cell. The metal groaned beneath his touch. Not dented, warped. He was becoming something new, something more. The third feeding came without effort. The guard approached him willingly, smiling faintly, as if greeting an old friend. Bryce didn't even need to compel him. The alien offered his neck like a gift. Afterward, Bryce stood in the center of his cell, eyes closed, and listened. He could hear the thoughts of the crew. Not words, impressions, emotions, echoes of intent. They were beginning to notice whispers of unease, reports of strange behavior, guards forgetting their shifts, energy fluctuations near his cell. The ship's AI had begun to run diagnostics. Good. Let them wonder. Let them fear. He was no longer just a vampire. He was becoming something else. A synthesis of predator and alien, a hybrid of myth and science. He looked at his reflection in the polished wall. His eyes glowed faintly now, a deep crimson threaded with violet. His skin shimmered with a subtle iridescence. He looked less human, more elemental. He smiled. The authority had taken him from earthly exile, but it had given him something far greater. Evolution. Chapter 7. The Cult of the Crimson Star. It began with a whisper. A low murmur passed between crew members in the lower decks, those who worked in the ship's underbelly, far from the command bridge and the eyes of the authority's enforcers. They spoke of a figure in black, a pale being who walked without sound, and whose gaze could melt the will of the strongest warriors. They called him the Crimson Star. At first, it was just a rumor, a ghost story, a superstition to pass the time during long shifts. But then the stories grew stranger. Guards who forgot entire days, crew members who claimed to have seen him outside his cell, walking the halls like a shadow, a technician who swore she'd heard him speak inside her mind. And then there were the women. It started with one, a junior officer named Calith, assigned to monitor the menagerie's life support systems. She was young, curious, and unburdened by the rigid caste pride of her male counterparts. She lingered near Bryce's cell longer than necessary. She asked questions. She made eye contact. And Bryce, ever the patient predator, answered. Not with words. Not at first. Just a feeling. A warmth. A pull. She returned the next day and the next, until one night she stepped through the energy field without hesitation. She didn't scream. She didn't resist. She knelt. From that moment, the cult began to grow. Calith brought others, quietly, carefully, female officers, engineers, medics, those who felt overlooked, underestimated, or simply curious about the being the males dismissed as a primitive. They came to him in secret, drawn by his presence, his voice, his eyes. He didn't need to compel them. Not all of them. Many came willingly, eager to serve, to listen, to believe. They called him the Pale Flame, the Star-born King, the one who drinks the dark. Bryce didn't discourage them. He taught them nothing, yet they learned. He promised them nothing, yet they followed. He fed sparingly, never taking too much, just enough to deepen the bond, to make them feel chosen. They brought him gifts, alien fruits, data slates, fragments of authority history. They told him secrets, ship schematics, command protocols, the location of the bridge, the name of the captain, Commander Varelia. Bryce was intrigued. He had not yet met her, but he had heard her voice, sharp, commanding, laced with venom. She was the highest-ranking female aboard the Varkal's Claw, and unlike the others, she had not come to him. Yet, one night, Calith knelt beside him and whispered, "She dreams of you." Bryce smiled. "Then she'll come soon enough." He stood in the center of his cell, surrounded by his silent acolytes, and looked up at the ceiling. Beyond it, stars wheeled in the void, worlds turned, empires rose and fell, and somewhere far behind him, Earth spun on, unaware that its last vampire had become a god. Chapter 8. The Invasion Plan. The bridge of the Varkal's Claw was a cathedral of light and shadow. Curved walls shimmered with holographic star maps. Dozens of authority officers moved in silence, their movements precise, their expressions unreadable. At the center of it all stood Commander Varelia, tall, statuesque, and draped in a uniform of obsidian armor that shimmered like liquid night. She had not yet spoken to Bryce, but she had begun to watch him. He felt her gaze long before she entered the menagerie. It was cold, analytical, but not without curiosity. She was not like the others. She did not fear him. Not yet. When she finally came to him, she came alone. The energy field dropped with a whisper. Bryce stood waiting, arms folded, a faint smile on his lips. "Commander Varelia," he said, bowing slightly, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" She stepped into the cell, her boots silent on the floor. Her eyes, violet and slit-pupilled, studied him like a specimen under glass. "You are not what you appear to be," she said. "I've been told that before. You've infected my crew. I prefer the term inspired." She didn't smile. "You've altered their behavior, their loyalty, their biology." Bryce tilted his head. "And yet, you're here, alone, vulnerable." "I am never vulnerable." He stepped closer. "Then why are your thoughts so loud?" She flinched, just slightly, enough for him to know he was right. "I dream of fire," she said, "of blood, of a voice that speaks in my sleep." Bryce's smile widened. "Then you've already begun to change." She stared at him for a long moment, then without a word she turned and left. The next day she returned, and the day after that. By the end of the week she no longer stood outside the cell. She sat beside him. It was Virelia who told him of the invasion. The Authority had been watching Earth for decades, studying its broadcasts, analyzing its weaknesses, the planet's fractured governments, its dwindling resources, its obsession with conflict. They saw a species on the brink of collapse and an opportunity. The fleet's mission was simple: conquer, cleanse, colonize. Bryce listened in silence. He had no love for Earth. It had exiled him, condemned him, cast him into the void. But as Virelia spoke of orbital bombardments and genetic purges, something stirred in him, a memory. A girl in Warsaw, 1942. Starving, terrified, hiding in a cellar. He had found her, fed her, protected her. She had died in his arms, whispering thanks. He had not saved many, but he had tried. And now the world that had feared him faced annihilation. He could let it burn, or he could become something worse than a monster. He could become a guardian. That night he summoned Calith and the others. They knelt before him, eyes glowing faintly with the power he had given them. "The Authority plans to destroy my home," he said. "I will not allow it." They looked up, waiting. "I need access to the ship's core, its navigation systems, its command protocols." Calith nodded. "We will show you." Bryce turned to the stars beyond the cell. He had been cast out, but now he would return. Not as a man, not as a vampire, as a reckoning. Chapter 9. Betrayal and Judgment. The betrayal came not from the outside, but from within. Bryce had grown too confident, too visible. His influence had spread like wildfire through the lower decks, too many eyes glowing faintly in the dark, too many whispers of the Crimson Star echoing through the ship's corridors, and someone, somewhere, had whispered in the wrong ear. The arrest was swift. He was meditating in his cell when the energy field dropped and a dozen Authority enforcers stormed in, weapons drawn. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. They struck him with a pulse weapon that sent searing pain through his nervous system. Alien tech, calibrated to disrupt even his enhanced physiology. He gloried in it. He collapsed and feigned paralysis. They bound him in chains of shimmering black metal, cold, humming with anti-psionic energy. He could feel them trying to suppress his compulsion, dull his senses, mute the fire in his blood. They didn't know it, but their attempts were useless on the being he had become. They dragged him through the ship like a trophy. The halls were silent. No one dared look at him. Not Calith, not Virelia, not even the guards who had once knelt before him. Fear had returned to the ship like a tide. They brought him to the throne chamber. It was vast and circular, carved from obsidian and lit by a single beam of violet light that fell from the ceiling like a divine spotlight. At the far end sat the king of the Zarquan Authority, Zaltor the Infinite. He was massive, even seated. His armor was etched with the bones of conquered species. His eyes glowed with a cold, ancient malice. His voice, when it came, was like thunder in a tomb. "You are the human," he said. Bryce, still on his knees, smiled faintly. "Among other things, you have corrupted my ship, infected my bloodlines, defiled my command. I've been busy." Zaltor rose. The chamber trembled. "You are sentenced to death," he said. "By incineration. Your ashes will be scattered into the void." Bryce's smile didn't fade. "I invoke Kor Tal." The chamber fell silent. Even the guards froze. Zaltor narrowed his eyes. "You dare?" "I do," Bryce said. "Trial by combat, authority law, ancient and binding." The king's jaw clenched. "You are not of our kind." "Your laws don't specify species, only challengers, and I challenge you." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The law was clear, rarely invoked, never by an outsider. But it was binding. Zaltor sneered. Then by the rights of Kortal, you will face my bloodline, all of them, at once. A hologram flared to life above the throne. 22 figures, each a warrior of royal descent. Generals, champions, executioners. Bryce looked up at them, then back at the king. I accept. The king's laughter echoed through the chamber like a death knell. So be it, he said. You will die on Rexos, before the eyes of the galaxy. Bryce rose to his feet, snapping his restraints like a withered blade of grass. He looked the king in the eye and said, I've died before. Chapter 10. The Planet of Blades. Rexos was a dead world. Once a lush jungle moon orbiting a red giant, it had been scorched to ash during an Authority weapons test centuries ago. Now it served a new purpose: ceremonial combat. A place where bloodlines were tested, honor was proven, and executions were made into spectacle. The arena was carved into the planet's crust, a vast crater ringed with obsidian spires and tiered seating that stretched into the sky. Ships from across the galaxy hovered above like vultures, their hulls gleaming with the colors of 100 worlds. Broadcast drones zipped through the air, capturing every angle for the millions watching from afar. At the center of it all stood Bryce Theroux. He wore no armor, no weapons, just a long black coat that fluttered in the dry wind and a calm expression that unsettled even the most hardened spectators. His eyes glowed faintly beneath the twin suns, no longer vulnerable to their light. The alien blood had changed him. He was no longer bound by Earth's rules. Across the arena, the gates opened. 22 warriors emerged, each a scion of the Authority's royal bloodline. They wore ceremonial armor etched with their house sigils, and each carried a weapon of their choosing. Plasma glaives, gravity hammers, neural whips, and blades that shimmered with quantum edges. The crowd roared. Bryce didn't move. A voice boomed from the spires above, Zaltor himself, watching from a throne suspended in the air. Let the rite of Kortal begin. The warriors charged. Bryce closed his eyes and vanished. He moved like smoke, faster than thought, faster than light. One moment he was standing still, the next he was behind the first warrior, his hand piercing through armor and bone. The body crumpled before it hit the ground. Bryce held a beating green heart aloft. The crowd gasped. The second warrior swung a hammer the size of a starship engine. Bryce caught it mid-swing, twisted, and shattered the warrior's arm with a flick of his wrist. He moved through them like a storm, a blur of motion and crimson light. Blood sprayed across the sand, violet, green, silver, alien blood, royal blood. He didn't just kill. He dismantled. He broke their weapons, shattered their pride, reduced centuries of breeding and training to dust. Some tried to flee. He let them run, then appeared in front of them, smiling. Within minutes, 21 bodies lay broken in the dust. Only one remained. Prince Varnak, youngest of the bloodline, barely more than a boy. He stood trembling, his blade shaking in his hands. Bryce approached slowly. The crowd was silent now, watching, waiting. Varnak dropped his weapon. I yield, he whispered. Please don't kill me. Bryce stopped. He looked up at the king's floating throne. Is this your legacy? He called. Children sent to die for your pride. Zaltor rose, his face a mask of fury. You are no warrior, he spat. You are a bloodsucker. Bryce smiled. That I am. And I'm a mirror. He turned back to Varnak, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and whispered something no one else could hear. The boy wet himself. Then he walked to the center of the arena, raised his arms, and let the suns bathe him in their red light. The crowd erupted, not in fear, in awe. Across the galaxy, beings who had never seen a human now whispered his name. Bryce Theroux, the Crimson Star, the vampire who conquered kings. Chapter 11. The Fall of the King. The throne chamber aboard the Varkal's Claw was silent when Bryce returned. He entered alone, his coat torn and stained with the blood of 21 royal heirs. His eyes burned with a quiet, terrible light. The guards at the entrance stepped aside without a word. No one dared stop him now. At the far end of the chamber, King Zaltor stood waiting. He had removed his ceremonial armor. What remained was a towering figure of sinew and scar tissue, draped in a cloak of woven starlight. His crown hovered above his head, suspended by magnetic fields and ancient tradition. "You should not have survived," the king said. Bryce stepped forward. "You should have sent more sons." Zaltor's jaw clenched. "You think this makes you worthy? You are a parasite, a relic, a mistake." "I'm a mirror," Bryce said again, "and you don't like what you see." The king descended the steps of his throne, each footfall echoing like a drumbeat. "You've poisoned my bloodline, corrupted my command. You've turned my daughters into slaves and my sons into corpses." "I didn't turn them into anything," Bryce said. "I just revealed what they already were." Zaltor roared and lunged. The throne chamber exploded into motion. The king moved with the fury of a dying star, his fists shattering the floor, his voice shaking the walls. But Bryce was faster, stronger. He danced around the blows, his movements fluid, effortless. He struck with precision, nerve clusters, pressure points, joints. The king bled. For the first time in centuries, he bled. "You think you've won?" Zaltor snarled, staggering back. "You think they'll follow you?" Bryce caught him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. "I don't need them to follow," he said. "I need them to remember." He threw the king across the chamber where his body became fully embedded into the metallic wall. The crown flickered and fell, rolling across the chamber until it came to rest at Bryce's feet. He picked it up, held it in his hands, then turned to face the chamber's high council, who had gathered in silence to witness the end. "I am not your king," he said. "I am not your savior." He placed the crown on the floor and kicked it away. "I am your reckoning." No one spoke, no one moved. Then, slowly, one by one, they knelt, not out of fear, out of awe, out of understanding. The Crimson Star had risen, and the authority would never be the same. Chapter 12. The Vampire Throne. The throne was not built for a human or a vampire. It was a towering construct of obsidian and alloy, shaped like the ribcage of some long-dead god. It vibrated faintly with energy, alive with the memories of those who had ruled before. When Bryce sat upon it, the chamber seemed to hold its breath. He didn't fit. Not physically, he could sit, recline, even rest his arms on the curved bone-like rests, but symbolically. He was not bred for this, not chosen, not born of authority blood. And yet, here he was. The throne accepted him. Sensors embedded in the structure scanned his body, his neural patterns, his genetic code. The system hesitated, then yielded. The chamber lights dimmed. A low chime echoed through the ship. Recognition. Calith entered first, flanked by the other acolytes. They knelt without command. Behind them came officers, engineers, even former guards. Some bowed, some simply stood in silence, eyes wide with something between reverence and disbelief. Commander Varelia approached last. She no longer wore her armor. Her eyes glowed faintly, her posture relaxed but alert. She stopped at the base of the throne and looked up at him. "You've won," she said. Bryce studied her. "Have I?" "You sit on the throne. The king is dead. The bloodline is broken. And yet the stars remain unchanged." She tilted her head. "What will you do?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The authority was built on conquest, fear, obedience. I could continue that, expand it, rule as they did. But you won't. No, he said. I'll do worse. A murmur rippled through the chamber. I'll make them think, he continued. I'll make them question. I'll show them what they are, what they could be. I'll give them a choice. Varelia's eyes narrowed. You'll give them freedom. Bryce smiled. And watch what they do with it. He stood, the throne humming behind him. He walked to the center of the chamber and gestured to the star map that hovered above the floor. Earth was a faint blue dot, distant and fragile. I won't let them touch it, he said. Not now. Not ever. Calith stepped forward. You would protect the world that exiled you? I would protect the idea of it, Bryce said, because if they can fear me and still survive, maybe they deserve to. He turned back to the throne. I am not your king, he said again, but I am your future. And with that he sat. The chamber bowed, the stars shifted, and the vampire ruled. Chapter 13. Reflections in the Void. The throne chamber was quiet now. The acolytes had dispersed. The council had returned to their sectors. The ship moved through space on a new course, a fleet of 1,000 ships following. They no longer traveled toward Earth, but away from it, deeper into the uncharted dark. Bryce sat alone, the stars wheeling slowly beyond the panoramic viewport. He had not moved in hours. He didn't need to. Time passed differently for him now. It always had, but this was something else. The alien blood still coursed through him, reshaping him in ways he didn't fully understand. He no longer hungered. He no longer tired. He simply was. A constant. A fixed point in a galaxy that refused to stop spinning. He rose and walked to the edge of the chamber, where the star map hovered in silence. He reached out and touched the projection of Earth. It glowed faintly beneath his fingers. Still there, still fragile, still home. He thought of the trial, the exile, the silence of the Erebus, the hallucinations, the first feeding, the arena, the blood, the crown. He thought of Elena, of the girl in Warsaw, of the countless lives he had touched, taken, saved, forgotten. He was not a hero. He was not a villain. He was a story. And now, he was the one writing it. Behind him, the throne radiated with light. It no longer felt foreign. It no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a tool, a weapon, a promise. He turned back to the stars. There were other empires out there, other authorities, other kings who ruled through fear and fire. He could feel them, like distant storms on the edge of his senses. He would find them. He would break them. Not for vengeance, not for conquest, but for the simple, undeniable truth that had carried him through centuries of darkness. He was still here, and he was not done. He smiled, fangs glinting in the starlight. Let the next 300 years begin. And with that, the last vampire in outer space stepped into legend. The end.